Hi, and welcome to this week's mailbox. I'm going to be going through the comments, but at the very last bits there is going to be something that may have consequence for the channel. So if you're interested in that, you'll wait till the end on that one. So first comment up for this week, and it says, what do I think of the idea of a buffer class? A class which doesn't really heal or DPS, just focuses on giving themselves or their party and raid combat enhancement, similar to a support role, or Holy Paladins of Vanilla. Holy Paladins of Vanilla. All Paladins of Vanilla, I think if you're referring to just going around putting blessings on people. The idea of the Paladins, you know, blessing like 40 people every 5 minutes was a very bad mechanic. I'm certainly not in favour of that. The general idea of a class who is some sort of support class, I am in favour of. The only way I can see it sort of working is much like they do with the Disciplines Priest now, which is basically like a half healer, half DPS. That's actually really good because there's certain situations, particularly in mythic raiding, but it can equally apply to anything where you're actually trying to beat a DPS timer or something like that. The usual thing, let's say you're looking at a fight and you think, well, you know, we'd use 4 healers to make it comfortable, but it can be done with 3 healers if people behave themselves and don't take lots of unnecessary damage, and dropping down to 3 healers allows us to bring another DPS. And in a situation like that, sometimes you're in a situation where you know that 4 healers is a little bit more than you need, but when you go down to 3 healers, people just die because the 3 healers is not quite enough. Situation like that, absolutely fantastic. You can have a half and half, something that does the healing of half a healer and the DPS of half a DPS. That sort of flexibility, I'm totally in favour of. And I would like to see that expanded to other healing classes, and the Paladin would be the obvious one to do it. I understand why Discipline Priest would be the first one you do it for, simply because priests have 2 healing specs. That's just the way it has been, and the Discipline Priest, as it was for the last, well, forever, has never been totally satisfactory. So, you know, I understand why they did that one. Yes, I would like to see it brought to Paladins as well, and I'd be interested in that. That would be pretty good, in my opinion, as well. But in general terms, I don't really see Blizzard doing it. I don't see them really moving away from the so-called Holy Trinity, which is having tanks, healers and DPS in a group. For dungeons, you know, maybe it creates some difficulties as well. There are times where there's nothing to hit for a Discipline Priest in a dungeon where it's not ideal. Like on Helya, for example, Helya Transitions, sorry, behave yourself. You know, and the end of More Souls. Mostly in dungeons, you don't really have a situation like that, so it's not too bad. But when you do, yeah, it can be a little bit difficult. You have to then move to more inefficient heals, and it's not very satisfactory. So, but I would love that. I would be very supportive of the idea of a support class or support specs within classes. You know, maybe roll it out to more classes that have like these half and half, like proper hybrid specs, proper hybrid ones, not just the old-fashioned hybrids where you were effectively a DPS spec, but you had healing or tanking abilities, and so as a result it felt that your damage should be reduced, when in actual fact the healing and tanking abilities you had were absolutely appalling and would never allow you to seriously heal or tank. Next one, it says, I'm not sure what this one's about actually, I could do some explanation. It says, well, at least this raid release is timed nicely for your job for once. It's not. I'm really busy at work. I think this has come from the time where I talk about the fact that no expansion has ever released when I've had time off work. I can't book time off work like a lot of people can. I get plenty of time off work, but I can't book it. It's fixed, and releases have never occurred during those times. I can't swear that raid releases have never occurred at good times for me, though. Occasionally they have. But this particular raid release, no, this is not timed at all well. This is like one of the busiest times of the year. Like the first term is like the longest, and because it's the longest, it's the busiest because everything sort of piles up. After Christmas, it gets a little bit easier, but yeah, it's right in the middle of a half term here. So I've had enough time back at work since the last little break that, you know, I'm up to my eyes in it, and long enough to go that there's no way of clearing the decks for another 4 weeks. But it may not matter. It may not matter because I might not be raiding next year. But more about that right at the end. Next one. So this is talking about MMOs in general. It says, to me, I don't care about big releases as 2 of the better MMOs have now had horrible failure launches, both ESO and Final Fantasy XIV. So to me, if you're not playing WoW or Guild Wars 2 or Final Fantasy 14, you're missing out on the 3 best MMOs. Really like aspects of ESO and Star Wars The Old Republic, but if you don't sub Star Wars The Old Republic is horrible, in ESO you miss the bottomless crafting bag. As for me, Ashes of Creation or a few others have, until they move the genre forward, WoW remains my pay one and Guild Wars 2 the free one. I mean, a couple of things in there. The free-to-play model in general, obviously, there's no such thing as actually free-to-play. What you're doing is, whenever there's a free-to-play model up there, that game company basically regards it as carte blanche to try and extract as much money as you can. And for a lot of people, they'll be taking as much money out of it as you can. Most people will be paying, not most people, but a lot of people will be paying a lot more than they would just on a subscription model. The subscription model of WoW is, I think, quite good because it's like you get all of the game for this. But at the same time, I'm not opposed to extra little cosmetic, as I've said before, and I'll come to that later, microtransactions, because it's based on the idea that everyone gets everything they need from the game for a flat fee. But if people want to pay more to get more, then that's fine too, as long as they're not getting an operational benefit, a competitive advantage from it. That's always my big thing with it. In terms of Ashes of Creation, moving it forward, I'm not sure that I'm totally convinced by that. I have paid myself to get early access to Ashes of Creation. I've sort of paid into it. So it looks interesting enough for me. From my point of view, I will be quite happy to buy a game if it'll keep me entertained for a couple of months. I mean, if you think about it, I don't play these days I don't buy, at any rate, single-player games. But with single-player games, I mean, how long do most people expect them to last? A couple of months? They expect you expect to last a couple of months, and then you want another one. So from my point of view, even though an MMO is supposed to be long-term, if it will give me enough, because they cost about the same anyway, if it gives me enough gameplay to keep me occupied for a couple of months, even around other games, I'm okay with that. I'm fine with that. I don't feel ripped off, and I think Ashes of Creation will do that. It's like Black Desert Online. I mean, Black Desert Online, I played it for a couple of months and then got to a certain point. I thought, well, I can't, I don't want to go any further with it. But I was fine. I was fine with what I paid for it. And but I don't think it will. And I think a lot of people, especially when it's an independent product, people think, oh yeah, they sort of feel, to a certain extent, I might agree as well, that it's corporate forces that prevent MMOs being what they could be. And some people will think, oh, well, this is independent, and therefore it will be everything I want from it. And it won't. It'll be everything the producer wants from it, the guy who's creating it, who may well be creating it for all the best motives. But I think ultimately there seems to be groups of people that go around from new release to new release of different games, MMOs in particular, that just hype it up and hype it up. And then it releases and they play it. And then they're disappointed. They sort of feel betrayed by it. So I think Ashes of Creation will be interesting. I don't see it as being a game changer as yet, or I've not seen anything in it that makes me think, yes, this is a totally new type of game. But time will tell on that one. Time will tell. Next one, back onto proper WoW stuff now. It says, considering the overall theme of the upcoming expansion, Battle for Azeroth, do you think they might do a smaller raid where it is thematically a Horde-themed raid on Alliance and an Alliance-themed raid on Horde? And how far do you think they will go in terms of unique encounters? They hinted at the possibility of having unique faction-based bosses in raids, not whole raids. I don't think they would do entire new raids. A few reasons. One is they've already said in Legion that they regret doing a lot or the amount of the class-specific content they did, because as they put it, when they do a class quest, that's enjoyed by 1/12 of the population. It's not quite the same because different numbers of people play different classes. But the point being that it's not available for everyone. They want, and you can see as Legion's gone on, they've done less of it to the point where there's now none of it in terms of the new content. It's all the stuff that we'll all do. Now, faction-based stuff, of course, is not 1/12 of people enjoying it. It's like half and half. But that's still producing content that only so many players will be able to do and the other ones won't. So from that point of view, I don't think it's very likely. But there are more reasons to it than that. Raiding is of course, inherently competitive. You're not competing with each other in the same way as you are PvP, but different teams competing with each other in terms of who can beat it fastest. So to have it genuinely different for Horde and Alliance is a non-starter. The best they can do is what they said they might do. The odd boss being a faction boss. But even then, it'll just be purely cosmetic, I feel. The mechanics will be exactly the same. So they'd have to come up with two... And it wouldn't necessarily be big name Alliance and Horde characters that you fight against. It may or may not be. But they'd have to effectively have the same abilities. They may look different. The spell effects may look a bit different. But the mechanics would have to be exactly the same. The loot would have to be the same. It might have different names, but it would have to be basically the same. Because I don't think that they can come up with unique fights for Horde and Alliance in a real sense. Now, I could be proved wrong on that, but I have serious reservations that they would do that. I personally don't think it would be good for the game either. Now... next one. Let's get into a bit of an argument here. There's going to be for and back here. I'm going to play devil's advocate on some of these comments. It says, well, in reality, the Horde always were the bad guys. They invaded Azeroth when they came from Draenor in the First War. The thing is that in Warcraft, you also get to play the bad guy. Even in the Frozen Throne, you play Arthas and experience firsthand his betrayal and blah, 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 blah. Even though the Horde or the final bosses are the ones that created all this conflict to start with, you kind of like them. That's why you get most of them players playing them. I'm not sure. Reasons for playing Horde, I think, are many and varied. I'm going to sort of argue against this. I don't really see the Horde as the bad guys as such because, for a start, although, sure, they accepted, or some of them accepted the blood of Manoroth and then, invaded Azeroth. The ones who did that are no longer really with us. The Horde that exists now, for a start, I mean, what you're talking about there in terms of invading Azeroth is just the Orcs. The Orcs are a major part of it. But that doesn't include the Tauren, who are native to Azeroth and didn't really upset anyone. Any war that came to them was not on their part the provocation. Same with Trolls, really. Forsaken a little bit different. Blood Elves, again, just want to keep themselves to themselves. Goblins, they just want to make money. So most of the Horde, by race at any rate, are certainly not the bad guys from that point of view. And even the Orcs, I would say, the ones who are now mostly part of the Horde, very few of them came from Draenor, I would say now. Because you're going back a long way now. It's a good couple of generations. You have to remember, when the Orcs first invaded Azeroth, the current king of Stormwind, Anduin's great-grandfather, was on the throne. That's how long ago it was. Some people sort of forget that a little bit, and the film does nothing to dispel that because it skips a generation as well in terms of the film, but the film's not an accurate representation of how the story actually went. So it's a very long time ago. So there are people on either side who still remember it, but they were all quite young at the time, unless they're one of the ancient races, in terms of Orcs and humans. So yeah, most of what is the Horde now had no hand in invading Azeroth. So I'm going to say I don't really consider them bad guys from that point of view. Individuals on the Horde or the Alliance side may be regarded as bad guys. And that includes Sylvanas, I think, at the moment. Even though you've got a bit of sympathy for her. Right, next one. Cosmetics. Back to cosmetics. The problem with cosmetics, though, is they need to be unique enough and completely different from anything else in the game. This is talking about as if they were given as microtransactions. Essentially, those models can never be used again, and nothing like them can either. The other thing is, while those awesome-looking mounts sit in the cash store, we get poor quality recolors. This is true, but it's not a downside, this. It is certainly true. If you're going to put cosmetic stuff on the online store, it needs to be completely different to what is in-game. Now, there are a few little comments about this, and some people sort of suggesting that that would mean the quality of the stuff we do get in-game would be less. That's not necessarily true, because you're assuming that what's going to happen is you say to the artist, right, do your best work, that's going on the online store, and then your least good work, we'll just put that in the game. You'd get new people, and it's not throwing money away either, because you consider it this way. Let's say you get an artist to design, some new armor or something like that, or a mount, or a pet, whatever it happens to be. Then you're going to charge for that on the online store. Enough, not everyone will buy it, of course. Enough people will buy it, however, that you more than make up the salary for the artist who did it. So you actually just employ extra artists specifically as an entirely different team, specifically to come up with new and unique cosmetic items to put on the online store. Now, there's a couple of ways you can go about this. But first of all, the main point I would say is that because that team would be hired entirely to do that, they'd be separate from the rest of the art team. And that might be to the benefit, because then without sort of leeching of ideas across, then they could be very, very different and have a very different focus and be totally different to the stuff in game. And in actual fact, the two teams could well be trying to outdo each other. An awful lot of people will buy armor and mounts and stuff like that off the online store, not because it looks better than what you can get in game, although it has to have at least be the same quality. It doesn't want to look worse, but because you can't get it in the game. You know, it's something that you can only get on that online store. Some of the online store mounts we get now don't look any better than stuff you can get in the game. Some of them look terrible, but people will still buy them because, you know what, you can't get it in game. And then there's two ways they could do about it in terms of maximizing their revenue for this. They could just put it on the online store as exists in World of Warcraft now. Or they could do what Elder Scrolls Online do, which is that some stuff that you just put on the online store and that's where it goes. And a couple of bits a month, maybe, and it's available only for that month. It's like, okay, you've got this month. At the end of this month, if you haven't bought it, you ain't getting it. You know, it's gone forever. There's not going to be any recolors. It's just gone completely forever, which could be used to browbeat some people into getting it where they might not have done, because it's like, well, I don't want it now, but maybe in a couple of months I decide, actually, I would have liked it, and it'll be too late. So I'll get it just in case. So it rushes it browbeats a few people into sort of spending their money on it. So you could do either of those two things. But the bottom line is, for me, you wouldn't be diluting the quality of the stuff in game, because that would be still done by the current art department, who will have a great deal of competitive spirit to want to outdo the other team anyway. So we'll still get really great quality from them. In fact, the extra competition might increase the quality of it, although I haven't really got anything bad to say about the art team. And a totally separate art team to do the other stuff. That's my view on it anyway. That is my view. And again, all about this is not me saying that I want microtransactions in the game. This is very much me sort of saying that in order to raise extra revenue, I would rather they went down that route than down other routes that they have tried and seem to continue to try. Okay, next one. Very recently started watching your videos. Well done, keep it up, thank you very much. Starting to bug me, the bias for Alliance against the Horde. I play both fashion actively and often so. Just don't understand why people are quick to judge anything before we actually know. So this is me sort of arguing the other way now. I do personally think there is a lot more to the story. This is to do with the synopsis about the fact that, you know, basically Battle for Azeroth is going to be started by the Horde. It says we're unsure, you know, so this, just to bring you up to speed before I can talk about the next bit, the synopsis is that it describes, it's a passage from the book that was given to people who went to BlizzCon. And Wowhead, of course, published it as well as a few others. So we know what's involved in it. And it's basically Sylvanas planning for an attack on Stormwind. She wants to reignite the war between the Horde and the Alliance, and, you know, properly a last war, a great war, one to finish it off completely. And it says, we are unsure of what part of the book that chapter is from. We're not really, and it actually doesn't matter. We're told very clearly where it's from, because we know that the book takes place immediately after the events on Argus. So the Antorus raid, which some people will be completing next week on normal or heroic, or both, at that point, this is when the book takes over. Now, of course, the book doesn't come out for another half a year. A bit more, actually. 7 months. But nonetheless, it takes place at that point. So we know it's immediately at that point. Also, we know that the events, what's going on while she's explaining all this to her sidekick, is there's a great parade celebrating the victory of the Burning Legion. So we also know that it's taking place, if we didn't know already, we know the book is taking place immediately after Argus, and this being a parade, a victory parade, we also know must be fairly early on in the book as well, because it's taking place at that point. And there's, you know, Sylvanas is giving her motivations for starting this war in that synopsis as well. So we're not having to assume very much at all. It's not as a result of revenge for anything. It's literally as a result of the fact she needs to shore up her authority, because she looks like, you know, her authority in Undercity is waning because she's spending so much time in Orgrimmar. She knows if she spends less time in Orgrimmar, then her authority will wane there as well, because there's a load of people that really don't understand why she's war chief in the first place. So, yes, she wants to get straight back into war. on that, and we know that motivation quite clearly. So we know that she is looking for a fight. She's not going to do it as a result of being provoked, and that would make no sense anyway, even if we didn't know that, because Anduin, we know, is not the sort of person who's going to provoke war. He actually wants peace. He's made it clear time and time again over the last few expansions. He is after peace between the Alliance and the Horde. So there's no opinion to this at all. We know this as an absolute fact. Now, we don't necessarily know what's going to spark it. We know about the burning of Teldrassil being a thing. We don't know actually what's going to trigger that. That's the only unknown in it, really. Says, guess maybe I'm on too on the fence here. I think what it is if there'll be a lot of people who don't like to see the Horde as bad guys, and rightly so, by the way, because all the way through Warcraft and World of Warcraft, they've not really been seen as the bad guys. It's always been two different sides, two different perspectives. And so there will have to be some part of the storytelling that excuses it. But also we have to remember that the Horde under Garrosh also went a bit nuts at the end. And the Horde at that point was seen as bad guys. The only redeeming feature was the fact that there was a faction of the Horde split off to fight against Garrosh, which preserved the dignity of the Horde. Will there be a similar thing here? I'm not sure, because, of course, the rest of the Horde seem to be well behind Sylvanas on this one. Certainly showing all the different races fighting at Lordaeron seem to indicate that. Is it a case that Sylvanas is basically going to dupe the Horde into thinking the Alliance has made the first move? But whatever way you slice it, I'm going to see Sylvanas as the bad guy here. Next one. This is about Mythic Plus. My suggestion, really, that there's no need for it to really drop artifact power here, but someone's saying it. I think this is about with Titan Forging. It says maybe they're afraid that Mythic Plus won't work without Titan Forging. I think I would agree with that. I don't think Mythic Plus would work as well without Titan Forging. Mythic Plus dungeons have throughout Legion given two things. One is gear, one is artifact power. At the moment, it's not a fantastic way to get artifact power. You know, if you've got loads and loads of times in the game, obviously you're going to get far more artifact power by doing loads of Mythic Plus as well as the other stuff than someone who's just going to do the other stuff. But whereas at one time in the past, it was a very efficient way of getting AP. But what it's always been good for is, Lou, and you always know what you're actually hoping for is Titan Forge. You can have people in like 940 plus item level who will do decent level Mythic Plus dungeons. The base item level of which is 915 from the end cache, not the weekly cache, the end cache. But there's every chance that you can get something higher. And if you do it enough times, every now and then you're going to get something higher. So you are going to get an upgrade now and then. So yeah, I think without Titan Forge, Mythic Plus becomes much less effective as a system. Now, whether there's enough people that do so much Mythic Plus that they do get enough Titan Forge pieces to keep it interesting, I don't know. Whether also they need people to do that, because there's another question is, Titan Forge for me is one of those mechanics that's put in a game to try and keep people playing the game. It's not there because it's a great gameplay feature. I think it's just something that keeps people interested. If the sorts of people who would spend that much time anyway and farm that much Mythic Plus are the sorts of people who would stay subscribed if it weren't in there, then again you could argue it's not necessary. But I would, you know, if Blizzard are sort of thinking Mythic Plus won't work without Titan Forge, I would agree. Actually, I really don't think that it has the same appeal to a significant number of players. I'm not going to say how many as proportion. I can't possibly know that, but to a significant number of players with a lot of time on their hands to do a lot of Mythic Plus, I don't think it has the same appeal without Titan Forge. Next one, little economics. It says Blizzard needs to make money, which was my argument. It says that's a non-argument because it makes a lot of money through a perfectly fine subscription model. Here's the thing. The argument that a business, which is what this is, makes enough money is always the non-argument. I'm going to have to completely disagree here. It's always the non-argument. Ultimately, the business has to pay shareholders. The shareholders are not, by and large, interested gamers. They're people who want to make a lot of money. A lot of the shareholders, in fact, don't even really know what they've got their shares in unless they pay particular attention. What's quite common these days is to band together with wealthy people into a super, to go to an investment banker basically and say, look, here's a load of money, I want you to invest it for me. And they will look for what's going to give them the best return. So the majority of people who have shares in a company like Activision Blizzard don't give a crap about the quality of the products. They just want to know, are they going to get a good return from it? And they want the maximum return from it as well. And they will vote according to what they think is going to get the max return. There is no such thing as making enough money when you're a shareholder. Because if you've got a certain amount of money to invest, you don't just invest it in something that's going to give you a profit. You invest it in something that's going to give you the maximum profit. So if someone comes around and says, I've got an idea that's going to make more money, we might lose some players, but the ones who remain will pay more money. Well, that's what they like. And this comes on to the next one. It says, if they need to make more, the sensible thing would be upping the subscription cost. Actually, no, that's the worst thing to do, because if they up the subscription cost, I agree that it hasn't really gone up very much with inflation. If you look at, the cost of playing the game, getting the subscription when it came out 13 years ago, it's barely gone up in all that time. I agree it has been below inflation. But nonetheless, if you increase it, then you create a situation where some people can't afford it or just don't think it's worth it and they will stop playing. What is a far better system, instead of getting everyone to pay the same, is you get everyone to pay what everyone is prepared to pay. And you know that there are people who are willing to pay more. And you give those people an outlet to pay more, without giving them an operational advantage in the game, like I said before, and like I will always say. That's the sensible thing to do. Why lose customers? That's nonsense. Why lose customers? And it's the same in any business. Any business understands this. Like any entertainment business understands this. Like when you go to the theatre or something, or you go to a show of any kind, there isn't a flat price for the cost of a seat. You've got the cheaper seats and you've got the more expensive seats. You've got the luxury boxes and things like that. So everyone understands this concept in every business that exists, that some customers just want basic stuff that they'll pay a basic amount for. Some people want the premium content. And all you have to do in a game like this is just make sure that no one is seen to be getting a gameplay benefit by paying them more money. We don't want the pay to win, even though it's effective economically. And that's the argument here. See, it's not an argument between up the subscription cost or what I'm suggesting. The argument will very much be between, do we get people to try and pay more for pay to win, or do we get people to pay more for cosmetic? That's what it's between. Because anyone who runs a business knows that if you up the cost of the base quality, the basic item, fewer people will be paying for it. And then those fewer people, you've lost their custom for good. Next one. In fact, this is the last one. And this is the one where I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about the channel. It says, do a video on joining new guilds since you're currently looking. It'd be quite relevant. It would be quite relevant, but also quite useless. First of all, I have done a series on recruitment, which covered, amongst other things, some advice for looking for guild. It would be a very bad one for me to do now. Not only have I done it this year, and therefore I'll be just repeating myself, but I've been totally unsuccessful at it as well. So I'd lose all credibility. And that brings me on to the next thing. There is now, we are as I'm doing this, 3 days away from the expansion, not the expansion, behave yourself, the new raid opening. I don't have a raid group. So it now looks, unless something spectacular happens, I am not expecting something spectacular to happen. There is maybe one guild I may try and still apply to at this point. But I have been very unsuccessful. I haven't applied to, but the two I have applied to haven't seemed interested. I haven't seen very many actually specifically looking for Retribution Paladin. Even ones who are tend to seem to have it on quite low. And even some of the ones who seem to have it on higher priority, it's like, oh yeah, we're looking for a Retribution Paladin. When I've actually talked to them, it's like, oh, we've got quite a lot of melee. It'd be quite difficult. And like, why are you asking for Retribution Paladin then? But the bottom line is, so there aren't any, or at least not interested in me. So, and I have a minimum level requirement. I'm not just going to accept the best of what I can get. For me, there is a minimum standard required, even though it has dropped considerably over the last year or two. It still exists at some point. The bottom line being that that would then free me up to spend more time on aspects of the channel. Now, people are sort of asking me about this, and in the stream, from my point of view, there would not necessarily need to be any difference in the type of content I do, because all the type of content I do is not specifically geared to Mythic anyway. However, I have noted a couple of things. First of all, I have had comments in the past, sort of from people who seem to think it is aimed more towards Mythic raiders when it's not intended to be, at which point, you know, the perception may well be, well, if you're not even Mythic raiding, why are you doing this content? So some of my content might be difficult to do with any sort of credibility. So I'd have to see how that goes. But the bottom line is it would potentially allow me to do a bit more. I'm not talking about producing more videos, but maybe some more of the videos that take longer to do. Like there's a video I'm planning on getting out just before Antorus comes out, which I still have to do, and it's going to take me quite a long time. But it's the sort of thing I can do more of. So just keep an eye out for that one. So if I don't end up in one, you might start to see some videos that will be a little bit different. I might also take the opportunity to do one of the channels I've been planning to do as well at some point. But just to keep people up to date with that one. And also just to suggest, are there different types of content you would like me to look at as well? But I don't want to change what I'm doing really. Because from my point of view, as I say, it's all very, very relevant. Like a lot of... The only thing that would necessarily have to change is if I was going to be talking about how anything applies to, say, a Mythic raid encounter. But I don't really do videos like that anyway, from my point of view. So anyway, that just keeps you up to date there. That's also the end of the mailbox for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, give it a thumbs up is always very welcome. If first time you join this channel and you like this sort of thing, then subscribe as well to see the rest of it. Share it with other people you're interested in. If you've got any comments about what we've been talking about, put that down below. And until next time, I'll see you later.